Welcome to Coffee with Kyle, Brad Daugherty. I am really excited about this. We've spent tons of time on the bus at the racetrack, in this studio that I'm sitting in right now, BSing our way through multiple subjects, but we've never really touched on Brad Daugherty. That's the fascinating part to me, is that you probably know a lot more about me than I know about you. So today, it's Kyle Petty's day to learn about Brad Daugherty. So where'd you grow up at?
Yeah, I grew up in a little town of Black Mountain, North Carolina, which is up in western North Carolina. Little town, about 2,500 people, about 15 miles east of Asheville. The majority of my community were white people. And so out of those 2,500 people in my community, there was maybe 70, 80 black folks, of which were all my cousins. I grew up playing, baseball, basketball, football, but I also grew up hunting, fishing, and we loved racing. My entire family loved racing.
And you answered my next question, because I just wanted to get a sense of community. But I have to say, I don't think about Asheville, North Carolina, that area being a hotbed of basketball activity.
No.
But you guys in high school, you went to high school, Charles D. Owen High School, and you went to the state playoffs. What was that like to be in a small community? I remember when our team in Randleman went to the state playoffs in football. I mean, the entire town was there. How did that community react to that?
Yeah, so let me backtrack on that. So little town, we call it the Valley because it's up in the Shenandoah Valley. And if you're from the Valley, you're part hillbilly and part lumberjack. So they call us hilljacks. And I grew up on a little 25-acre piece of property with all my cousins. And at the back third of that property was potato and tobacco. And man, I knew that I did not want to be a farmer. And my dad, Roy Lee Daugherty, was the biggest race gearhead person you've ever seen in your life. He and my uncles, that's all we did. I mean, and we started out drag racing. And my dad was a military guy, big dude, 6'6", 6'7", about 275 pounds. He looked like he could bite the head off a 10-penny nail, but he was the nicest guy in the world. So we would go to these places, and I thought I could go anywhere I wanted to. And then, growing up, played those sports. It was great, getting the state championship. The town rallied around it. But in my little town, Kyle, my heroes weren't baseball, basketball, football people because we didn't have that around us. My heroes growing up were people like Bob Glidden, Warren Johnson, Jack Ingram, Bob Presley, and the King. That was my dad's guy, was the King. And we were at North Wilkesboro one weekend. And I'm telling you, Kyle, we were the only people of color at that racetrack. But my dad went wherever the hell he wanted to go, and I went with him. And we're standing at the fence there. Your dad's coming out of the bathroom. He just running there real quick to use the bathroom. And I'm standing there. And my dad's so excited, to see your dad. He's like, that is the man. He is bad at the ball. He's the greatest race car driver. So now that's my hero. Your dad comes out, and I'm like, hey, Mr. Petty. And I'm a little kid. Well, I never was a little kid. I was a younger kid. And your dad walked over, and I never will forget this. I can see it like it was yesterday. And your dad says, hey, man, what's going on, little fella? I said, hey, how you doing, Mr. Petty? I said, he said, well, who are you? I said, I'm Brad Daugherty, and I'm from Black Mountain, North Carolina. I'm so excited to be here. And he's like, yeah, it's going to be a good race today. He says, we got a pretty good race car. He said, man, you pulling for me? I said, yes, sir. And it seemed like he talked to me for 30 minutes, but it was probably 30 seconds. But it left such an indelible impression upon me because I'm the only face of color really standing around besides my dad. And your dad walked over and spent 20 seconds just wanting to know who I was. And so that kind of started it all for me. I didn't grow up watching Dr. J and Wilt Chamberlain and these guys. I just played ball because I was good at it.
Wow, that is fascinating. I guess I just assumed from the beginning, as good as you are. I've talked to guys like Davis Love and told me, he said, I hit more golf balls before I was 7 years old than you're going to hit in your lifetime. And I thought, yeah, I believe that, man. You've been playing a long time, And I guess I just assumed that a kid that makes it to Chapel Hill, a kid that makes it to the NBA, has been shooting hoops since he was 4 or 5 years old. But man, there had to be a line getting into Black Mountain with trying to get to your house to say, hey, come to my school, man. Why?
Yeah.
After all of that, did you as a group choose UNC and Dean
Yeah,
Smith. How did that come about?
sure. So I get along in high school. I'm a senior in high school. I'm recruited by 700 schools to play basketball. I never forget, I was walking from my science class, and there's a guy standing down by my locker. And I walk up, and it was the late Jim Valvano, coach at NC State. And he's leaning against my locker. And I walk up, I'm like, hello. And he's like, Brad Daugherty, I'm Jim Valvano, coach at NC State. He says, get used to looking at this ugly mug. I'm going to be coaching you for the next 4 years. And I'm like, yes, sir. And we're talking. I get through that. About a week later, I come home from shooting basketball with my buddies. I pull in the driveway, and there's a Cadillac sitting in the driveway of my home. And I go inside, and I hear this guy laughing, and it's Lefty Drizel. And he's sitting at the dinner table. And my mom is all, she's got her makeup all on. And there's a big spread, and he's eating, and he's like, oh, Bradley. And so this went on like several times. I mean, he would come and he would show up, and he just had my mom hoodooed. I was like, oh, my goodness. My mom's in love with Lefty Drizel. I'm going to, be in College Park, Maryland. That's the biggest city I've ever heard of. D.C., I'm scared to go to. So the last visit I took was to Chapel Hill. Kyle, all these places I went, I mean, I had homes promised to me, cars. And Coach Smith talked to me, took me around the campus, took me to some of the classrooms to show me that. He said, I'll make you one promise. He said, you will graduate from this university with a degree. He said, I'm not going to promise you you're going to start on my basketball team or none of that, but you will get a degree at this university. And I was sitting there, and my mom was like, it's a done deal. This is where you're going. I'm like, man, if I go to this school, I have a new Firebird, man, like Burt Reynolds. She's like, nope, you're going to Chapel Hill. And best decision I ever made in my life, because I got to spend that time with Dean Smith. And he taught me so much from the time I was a freshman there until the day he passed away. It was just an indelible impression upon my life.
Yeah, it's amazing that you say that, because I remember going to summer basketball camps. The whole camp would get together, and he would come and speak to us, and you could hear a pin drop. So you go to Carolina, and you end up coming in there. I think Worthy's leaving. Jordan's there. Perkins, Sam Perkins, Kenny Smith, those guys. Yeah. What was it like going from Black Mountain, North Carolina, to Chapel Hill? I mean, they just won a championship. You're in the middle of all of that.
So this was pretty wild. So I was a pretty good student. The academic things always came just pretty easily to me, which makes no sense because I'm just a big dumb hillbilly, but always did really well in school. And so I actually graduated from high school early. So I go to Chapel Hill. I'm turning 17 years old. And I walk onto this campus, and my peer group is all people 18, 19. And, I was a big guy, so everybody assumed I was their age, but I wasn't. And it seemed like every quarter I got bigger, stronger, faster. And I always had great work ethic and great attitude. And I'll tell you a great story that kind of highlights this. When I graduated from North Carolina, I always go back to see Coach Smith, because Coach Smith, when we all graduated as players, no matter where you went, he was always in your life. And so when I got my first big check in the NBA, he made me sign a deal with him that he could have complete autonomy to my finances to help monitor my finances. He did that for every player. So He would call you twice a month, whether it's me, Michael Jordan, Sam Perkins, and he'd be like, okay, I see you bought a Rolex watch. He's like, Brad, you're from Black Mountain, North Carolina. Why do you need a Rolex watch? I'm like, yeah. So I go back, and I'm sitting talking with Coach Smith one day, and I said, Coach, your psychology in basketball is just unbelievable. I said, how do you deal with the different generations of players? He said, you have to treat everyone the same. But when you have the opportunity to teach, he says, you got to teach people differently. I said, what does that mean? He said, great example. He says, Michael Jordan. He says, Michael is hyper competitive. He said, if I told Michael he couldn't hold his breath for 5 minutes, at 4 minutes and 45 seconds, there'd be snot bubbles blowing out of his nose because he's trying to hold his breath. He said, now, if I told Brad Daugherty he couldn't hold his breath for 5 minutes, he'd be like, yeah, you're right. I can't hold my breath for 5 minutes. But if I told him to do something for the betterment of the team, we're going to run a play or do this, if I explain it to you, you do it to the best of your ability. I said, yeah. He said, so you have to coach and teach people differently. I would always do the work, okay? but he would always just tinker with you psychologically and make you want to just, he dangle that carrot to make you want to be a better person. And that always bled over into being a better basketball player, which is interesting.
And you tell that story of teaching, other than what your parents taught you. Is there one thing that you take away from Dean Smith that almost comes up every day that you say, I learned that from him?
Absolutely. You know, the biggest thing I learned from him was two things. One was loyalty, and the other is empathy. He would always, I remember in college, you know, I got in trouble. I did something stupid. I was going like 100 miles an hour in a 35-mile-an-hour zone, or I got in trouble for that. Got in a little scrape at one of the little watering holes one night, punched a guy in the head. And when those things happened, you know, I was like, oh man, I am in trouble, you know. But those were the times he said, we're going to work through this. He was on my side. I've got your back, because everyone else has scattered. And Kyle, the interesting thing is when the times were great, I'll never forget, we're playing in a basketball tournament in Manhattan, and we're playing a couple of Ivy League schools. We're playing like Brown, and they can't play basketball, man. We are kicking their behind. I got like 35 at halftime, and I never will forget. We go in, and we're laughing, and he comes in, and he slams the chalkboard, and he hits it with his fist, and we're up like 40 points. And he looks at me, and he said, that was the most selfish half of basketball I've ever seen from a player in my life. I'm like, man, I just scored 30. I'm killing these guys. He's like, I'm going to take you back Monday. This was like on Friday. I'm going to show you. You missed 5 screens that you could have set for your teammates that would have given them a better opportunity and given us a better quality of shot than the one you took. And it really set me back. So it was always the yin and yang with him. And so I learned from that, you never know what someone else is going through. And I'm telling you, you see people, and somebody walks up to you, just like your dad did to me. You take that 2 seconds just to say hello, you know, just to say, yeah, man, I'm having a crappy day too. How are we going to get through it? But if you can do those things, if you can be loyal to a fault, which I think is a good thing, and you can be empathetic, that's as good as it gets.
That's great. That's good stuff, man. That's great advice. What is the feeling like on draft day to be the #1 draft pick of all the college players, of all the players in the draft, and they call your name?
So we're in New York City, and we're there at the plaza. We're getting ready for the draft. And I kind of thought I'd be a top 4 or 5 pick, no doubt about it. And then we go up to the draft, and I hear my name called first, and I'm like, what does this mean? You know, and obviously you think about the economic impact this is going to have. I mean, I'm like, listen, man, in high school, I got off the potato farm. I went and worked at Beacon Manufacturing Plant, loading blankets in train cars. And I was making, you know, $150 a week, and I thought I was loaded. You know, life is good, man. You know, I had it made. I could hunt, I could fish, I could goof off. I had $150 in my pocket. What else did I need? So now I'm sitting here, and I remember getting David Falk, he's a big-time agent today. He's Michael's agent. He walks over, he said, you understand the economic impact of this? I'm like, yeah, it's going to be a lot of money. He's like, it's millions of dollars for you and your family. And so that just kind of, when he said that, I never really thought about it. I was thinking about, man, I'm going to get to play in the NBA, and I'm the top cat, you know. And I thought about that, and I was like, that's a lot of money. I did figure out you can burn through it, but I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do, especially with these stupid race cars? I said, I picked the wrong thing to get into, you know. So, and this is where I get all of the grounding in my life. So I get back home, everybody's, you know, kind of excited, and it's my grandmother. And so I go up to my grandmother's house, and, you know, she cooked me up a big thing. She made the best fried chicken in the world. It was unbelievable. And so I go in, she made some fried chicken, and my nickname as a kid was Rhubarb, because we grew rhubarb as well. And she would make this rhubarb, it was like applesauce. And so as a little kid, I would go out in the garden, and I'd pull these big stalks of rhubarb, and I'd take it to her. And I just walk up to the door and knock, and she'd be like, oh my God, son. So she called me Rhubarb. So I go bouncing in there. She's like, Rhubarb, you've done well. I said, oh, yeah. I said, you know, got big deal. I got to go to Cleveland. I didn't even know where Cleveland was at. So I got to go to Cleveland next week. And go play in the NBA. And I said, Grandma, we do some things around the farm here. We can fix it up. She said, I'm going to tell you something, son. She said, this is a good day for you, but if you really want to impress me, cut my grass. I said, what? She says, you cut my grass every Friday. Today's Friday. She said, I know you're a big-time basketball player now, but my grass still needs to be cut. So I went through that. I cut her grass. I go back home. I'm sitting talking to my mom and dad. I'm like, I've got a little bit of money now. We're going to fix this old house up. We're going to get everything. And my mom looked at me and said, your daddy built this house. This house is fine. I don't want your money. She said, go be a good person. I want people to come back and tell me you're a good son. If you do that, that's all I ever want.
Wow.
I was like, wow. So that's kind of where it all came from, how it ended.
That's cool. Isn't it funny how no matter where you go, when you go home, you're still just that kid. You're still just that kid, man. I looked up, and I'm not much of a stat guy, but 19 points, 10 rebounds, all-star 5 years, and you retire at 28. So that, like, when you were there, dude. And then Cleveland retires your number. They didn't even retire Richard Petty's number. They retired Brad Daugherty's number 43.
Well, they did that night because it was 43. That's right.
and retired at 28. Was it just the grind of the sport on your body?
So in college, I had fallen playing pickup basketball with some guys, and I broke my tailbone. And the doctor, this was before the summer, the doctor said, it'll heal back together. Just take it easy over the summer and don't do anything stupid, and you should be fine. So when I came back to Chapel Hill for the next season, it had grown, my tailbone had grown back together, but I'm such a big guy, it had a big wedge of calcium on it. I was 28 years old. We're playing one night, and we're playing the New York Knicks, and Mark Price had stole the ball from John Starks, and I'm running, and he threw a bounce pass, and I caught it, and I was trying to lay it up, and Patrick Ewing tried to push me to foul me. When he pushed me, something popped in my back. And he grabbed me, and he's like, man, that was audible. I heard that. What was it? I don't know. It was my back. And so what I'd done is I had ruptured a disc in my back. Well, Back then, Kyle, this was the 90s. We didn't do MRI. You just played. And it was really a life lesson for me because I had a great high school basketball coach. I go to Chapel Hill. I got Coach Smith, who is, he's a father figure, and he's always looking out for your best interest. I get to pro basketball. I'm just a commodity. I thought these people really cared about me and whatnot. And I kept playing because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I get up one morning and my legs are numb. That led to one thing. Next thing we know, we're on the team plane. We're flying out to LA. We're going to go to Curl and Job, which is at the time the foremost orthopedic facility in the world. And I go in, I see this guy, Dr. Robert Watkins. Long story short, he comes in, he says, you're done playing basketball. He says, you need to have surgery right away. You've ground up all of this bone fragment in your back. And he's like, it's carelessness. So that, long story short, that was the end of my basketball career.
All right. So we've gone from Black Mountain to Cleveland and the NBA, and now we're retired. And I said earlier, Asheville is not a hotbed of basketball. I do think about it as a hotbed for racing. What is your earliest memory of going to that little racetrack?
Oh, so it goes beyond that. So I'm a kid. The heroes of my hometown were Jack Ingram, Bob Presley, Sam Ard would come down and race with us. Your dad would come through. But I remember going to Greenville.
Yes.
I'd go down there with my dad, and we'd go watch. And, man, I'm going to tell you, I've seen the best of the best come along. And I this is so vivid in my memory because I've got to be about 10 because this is about the time he won a track championship down at Greenville, a guy named Butch Lindley. Oh, God. So we would go and watch him race, and then I started kind of following him watching with my dad. And my dad's like, the two best I've ever seen on short tracks were Butch Lindley and Bob Presley. I'm just telling you. I ran across Robert at the Speedway. Robert and I used to shoot basketball together. Robert Presley could jump straight up and dunk a basketball. He was an unbelievable athlete.
No way.
Unbelievable. Now, he couldn't play what he thought he could play. He couldn't play. But he was an unbelievable athlete. And so he started running late models just a little bit. I started hanging around with him and going out to his race shop. I'd help him, you know, and they'd be 10 or 11 guys. And we just started working on race cars. So he started showing me how to work on a race car. So we started hanging suspension on a race car. He's showing me. Before you know it, over a couple of weeks, we got a race car. So Robert was racing at Asheville. It was like, he was like a buzzsaw. He didn't have the, I mean, it was every week we were about to get whooped by somebody, you know. It's like, man, Robert, we're starting in the back, and he wrecked everybody in the back to get. It was just crazy. And so he got better and better, and we just became buddies, man. And we started dragging that late model all over the country. So I'm with Robert. We're racing. We finally win a track championship, and so then I'm off to the NBA. So I come back, and I'm like, man, you know, I got a little bit of money, and Robert and I, he's racing still, run late model. I said, man, why don't we try to run Busch Grand National Series? Race is coming up at Bristol. So we got this race car, and me and Robert and like 6 guys hung the body on this thing. It was an old Oldsmobile body. Oh, it was horrible looking, Kyle. You should have seen this thing, man. So we get over there to Bristol. We go inside this racetrack, and I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, this is unbelievable. Robert's eyes are about this big. We go to qualify. He qualifies like 16th. I'm like, oh, wow. So we go on. We race, run 2 more races, and then we come to Rougemont, North Carolina. And that old Robert comes out. He starts moving people. We get to 2 laps to go. He's running second. I'm like, oh, my goodness. And he's running. He's racing Tommy Ellis. And we come down through there, and, I mean, he moved Tommy big. And we won the race. I'm standing there, you know, and I was the gas man. I gassed the car. Believe it or not, I used to gas the car. And, you know, I had blue jeans on and stuff like that. You don't know how many times, you know, I'd always forget, put the tire wrap in it and burp it, and I'd jam it in the car, and it would soak me. You know? So we won the race. So I go to the start-finish line, and Robert jumps out of the car, and he jumps on, and we're, man, we can't believe a bunch of hillbillies just want to push Grand National race. And I look around, I look down pit road, and here comes this little guy. He's walking up pit road. And as he got closer, I never will forget this. I could see goo-goo clusters on his uniform. It was Tommy. He walks, he's looking at me, and he stops probably 10 yards from me. He said, Brad Daugherty, y'all dirty, Brad Daugherty, y'all dirty. Ooh, I'm going to throw a snake on you. What the hell? You gonna throw what? I'm like, Tommy. I mean, this man, he went nuts. He never got with his fire truck. And he's knocking gas cans over. And I'm like, what is wrong? And so then Rick Mass comes over. Rick's like, yeah, Tommy's crazy, man. So that kind of got us started going down that path. And rest was kind of, you know, we went on racing after that. Robert ran a few more, you know, we ran probably 17 races together, ran really well. He had a chance to move up with another team at better funding. And I was happy. You know, I wanted him to go and run cup races and eventually.
What fascinates me with your story is that while you were going to Carolina, you were still messing with late model cars.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
What did Coach Smith say about that? Explain to me how you can go to college on a scholarship, and it's like you come in and it's like, you smell like gas, you look like you've been up under a car, and he's like, where have you been?
So this is how this always worked out. See, it worked out perfect for me because basketball season is usually done, you know, March. You finish up that semester, son, I'd be waiting on that dually to pull up with that race car. I mean, and so I'd get back and my hands would be destroyed. And Coach Smith, he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I got my hand pinched between motor and transmission. He didn't have any idea what I was talking about. He's like, these hands are going to make you millions of dollars, and they look like you've been beating them with pickaxes. Like, he would always say that. I'm like, it's just what I do. And same thing, I got the pro basketball. The worst thing happened when I got in the NBA was we traded for a guy, Larry Nance. I
was going to ask you. I had to go down to Larry Nance. I want to know this story. I want to know this, man.
So we traded for Larry Nance. He comes to Cleveland. And you know, and Larry, man, he's a big time drag racer. And so we became best friends immediately. And so, you know, and he called it roundy round racing. He says, man, I want to go roundy round racing. I said, well, I'm a drag racer. And so we would work on cars. And so we used to go out to Norwalk. Okay. He had a pro stock car, and then he had a pro sports.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
man. It made 1,000 horsepower. I told Larry, I said, man, I'm a race car driver. People don't get it. I used to race dirt bikes. People have when I was in college, I'm bouncing all over the place. I used to have an old Yamaha 250, and those things would get it, son. And I wrecked one summer, and I broke my thumb. It went up in my hand. And I was still playing basketball. And I came back to school, and I had to get it cast. And Coach Smith, he said, what happened? I said, I fell down a bank fishing. And he figured it out. I told him years later, man, I couldn't sleep for about 5 years. So anyway, we go out to Norwalk, and I'm like, Larry, I said, man, I want to drive that race car. He's like, man, I am not letting you get that race car. He's like, I don't even drive it right now because I'm playing. He said, all right. He said, just get in it and just make a smooth pass. So I get in that thing. I'm sitting there, and man, I'm strapped in. He showed me how to pull the chutes, all that stuff. He said, you're not going to make you think you will, but he said, it'll scare the piss out of you. But so I got that thing, Kyle. I pegged that thing. I'm holding that button. When that light turned green, it pushed me back. I couldn't even see. But I was so proud. I was not going to let him know that it scared the piss out of me. I go down through there. I go, wah, 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 wah. And I reach up and I go, boom. And that boom parachute comes out. That thing's bouncing. Kyle, I didn't see the whole run. My eyes were bouncing. And all of a sudden, I get that thing. It's, and I'm sitting there, man. And it took the breath out of me. All of a sudden, I hear this car coming. Brad, are you stupid? What are you doing, man? What are you doing? You just went 200 miles an hour. He's like, you're crazy. Get out of that damn car. Bill Boehner, who owned Norwalk Speedway at the time, he ran the track. He comes down. He's like, what the hell are you doing? You just went almost 200 miles an hour. I said, I told you, man. I'm a race car driver, man. He's like, get out of that car. Oh, man, we were crazy. We had so much fun.
So one more thing here. You go back to you and Robert putting that car together and going and winning. But what was that first Cup win like?
You know, it's the hardest thing I've ever been a part of. People have no clue. And when you see a guy like Kevin Harvick and Kyle Busch and those guys win 8, 9 races, it's unbelievable. So we're racing. But I did notice, obviously, with Ambrose in the race car, we go to these road courses. That cat carries that race car. We go to Sonoma, and we got them covered. We got enough fuel, but maybe not enough to run if there's an overtime situation. So he cuts the car off as we're coasting up the hill, and the pickup doesn't get it, and the car cuts off, and he can't start it. We're going to win a Cup race, and we end up going back to 12. And I tell Jimmy Johnson, Jimmy won that day. I said, we had, and Jimmy's like, well, I was pretty good. I said, no, we had you covered. You just got lucky.
You know, it's the first time I tried to re-crank it there on that left-hand bend uphill, and I just didn't refire, so my bad.
You know, Ambrose moves on, and obviously we pick up AJ Allmendinger. And I'm in the booth, and Rusty looks over. He's like, man, you guys got a good chance to finish top 2 or 3.
Allmendinger on Casey Kane for 3rd.
He's like, he says, let's talk about it. I said, no, I don't want to talk about it. So we keep racing along there. We get down to the last 5 laps, and we're leading the race, and they don't throw a caution. And we're racing, and I'm like, oh, man, we're leading. And Rusty's like, he's grabbing them. We're on TV, man. He's pulling them, and I'm trying to be cool. And we go down, and we come around, and we go through the bus stop, and Ambrose, he gets to right to AJ's fender, and he's starting to move him a little bit. And he kind of door slams him. I'm like, oh, man, that's it. And so they go down, they come back to the back, and they come back around, and they're getting ready to make the last corner before they come down the long straightaway, and all of a sudden, AJ just pulls right up beside him in the slow spot and just door slams him. And I saw Ambrose's hands go like that for a second. And when he did that, AJ pulled ahead of him.
Not giving Ambrose any pavement to work with there.
And I'm like, oh, man, he's got a little gap. I'm like, oh, man. I said, Ambrose, he's gonna bust our butts. He gets back to it. And so I'm watching, and AJ's pulling him and pulling him and pulling him. And I'm like, it's saying in my mind, I can't freak out on TV. We're on national TV. Rusty's losing his mind. He's jumping on me. He's like, you guys are going to win. You're going to win.
What a drive. What a race. What a victory. AJ Allmendinger is a NASCAR Sprint Cup Series winner.
We win the race. I'm like, oh my God, we won. And Rusty's jumping around, it's real awkward. We can't high five each other. The producer comes over the headset. He says, go to Victor Lane, man, get out of here. So I take off running. And I'm running down. I'm so excited, and Helton's down there. And everybody gives me a big hug. And AJ, and I run up and I grab him. And I'm hugging him and I'm holding him. And I'm just so excited. Everybody's pouring beer on him. And AJ's like, Brad. I'm like, yeah, man, we did it. He's like, no. He's like, I'm a grown man. Will you put me down? I was walking around. I forgot I had him. He's like, will you put me down? Oh, man. I'm telling you, Kyle, of everything I've done sports-wise, that is the biggest thrill.
I want to go to a part of this sport. If I go back to Wendell Scott, Wendell was a really good race car driver, but he was an owner. This is how he provided for his family. This was his family farm. And we look at Thee Dixon, who came along a little bit later. He was a part-time owner. Skinner drove for him, some of that. And then we have Brad Daugherty. I've always wondered how hard that was to come into predominantly a white sport.
Sure, absolutely. It's kind of interesting how I went down this path. My dad, I'll never forget, and I was playing baseball at a baseball park in Oakley, North Carolina. And it was me and my cousins and a couple of kids. We were the only African-American kids in that entire park. And we were getting ready to play. It was an all-star baseball game. And I heard another kid talking about our team, and he said the N-word. He said there's several of them on that team. And I never will forget, Kyle, just how it made me feel. I mean, I didn't hear that word a lot. And I didn't know the significance of it because I was just a kid. But it stopped me in my tracks. And every time I've ever heard that word in my life that's been used towards me, I can remember it to the day. So there's something that's ingrained in you as an African American. But so as I go home, I tell my dad about it. My dad was sick. He was getting sick as he got old. He got malaria in Korea. As he got older, he slowed down. But I remember he looked at me one day and he said, let me tell you something. He said, I want you to promise me you'll do something. I said, yes, sir. He said, I want you to live your life every day as if you are equal, no matter where you are or what you're doing. He said, if you don't do that, I'm going to kick your ass. That's what my dad told me. And I started laughing. And he says, I'm serious. I'm serious. He said, don't let anyone or anything stop you, deter you, or create a pathway. He says, don't let anyone else put a period at the end of your sentence. So as I came along and I got into the racing thing, I'd go to the racetracks and we'd go to all these crazy places and, Confederate flags. And I never really had anyone say anything to me. I mean, I'd go places and I didn't feel comfortable because of some of the things I saw or but the group of guys I was with was my best friends in the world. So I move along and then I start noticing that as I become more cognizant of it, there's no black people. So I start thinking about it and I start trying to put together the pieces to that puzzle. And I realize racing is not like baseball, basketball, football. You can't go play racing, okay? To be involved in racing, there has to be a bridge. And a lot of times there's a cultural bridge that gets you to that point. My lineage to racing was really the Presleys. Happy for a young man like Darrell Wallace to have the opportunities that he's had. I want to see more of that. I want to see more women have more opportunities. I want to see our sport be more inclusive. It does bother me when I go to racetrack and see so many Confederate flags because I know what some of that represents, and that's not good.
So if we go back to last year, the world changed, not just because of the pandemic.
Right.
There's been a societal shift, a movement, more of a focus on diversity, more of a focus on inclusion. How do you see the way the world is today?
Yeah, I mean, we saw a iconic shift in our culture, not only nationwide, but worldwide, with the things that happened with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and some of these things that people had always talked about, the issues with African Americans losing their lives due to police violence and those types of things. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was a pandemic or what it was, but all of a sudden there was a tipping point and people got to watch a guy actually die. You know what I mean? And I think it was just too much. But I was shocked when I got a call from Steve Phelps, the president of NASCAR, during this period. And he wanted to know how I felt and what I thought. And we talked about the sport. And how we could better the sport going forward. And this is before the things happened with Bubba. And he told me, he says, I think we're going to step up, Brad. He said, I know you've talked about a long time. We're going to ban the Confederate flag. I said, now, you know what you're doing, right? This puts you in a very precarious position. You guys over there have always been about the big machine. He's like, it's time. I think it's time now. We've bridged that gap from the years past of being, non-inclusive to saying, come check out what we're doing. Come on, man. We're going to love on you. You're welcome. I told Steve Phelps, I said, man, I cannot wait till this pandemic's over because I'm bringing some black folks to the track. And it's going to be big because I said, when the black women come, it's going to be unbelievable. And they're going to be cheering for Darryl Wallace, man. You better get, I told Steve, and he was laughing. I said, you better get ready. You better get ready. And people love racing, man. Everybody needs to come and sample this because it's the greatest sport in the world, I think.
Listen, man, this has been fascinating. Thank you for doing this. And I just want to say, this sport is a better sport because of you. And I love you, man. Thank you for being my friend, and thank you for doing Coffee with Kyle. I appreciate it, man.
Hey, man, you're an awesome guy. You're a great friend. I love you to death. Man, thanks for letting me spend some of your time spinning some yards. I've had a lot of fun.
Hey Motorsports fans, thanks for watching. Make sure you hit subscribe before you go for all the latest news and highlights across motorsports.